Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoyed today's episodes. Yes, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Reuben Benzel, and I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, and I'm proud to be an alumni of Columbus City Schools. So I had the privilege of being able to, go to a high-performing elementary school in the city school district, kind of a more mainstream middle school, and then a magnet school. And I kind of got interested in education out of my internship program in high school, where I shadowed my favorite 8th grade math teacher. And I enjoyed working with students on my favorite subject, helping them out, math. Whether it was, a middle schooler at that time at a 1st grade math level, or even an 8th grader that was already taking geometry and everything in between. So I went and I got a liberal arts education at Oberlin. I always knew I wanted to be like a high school math teacher. So I have, an econ major, math minor. And I think it's great that I got sort of that statistical background to kind of get, some training and being able to interpret data in education. And then I moved to Indianapolis in 2012 to join the Indianapolis Teaching Fellows Program. And I spent my first 2 years teaching at a turnaround school that had just been taken over by the state. And in 2014, I started at my current school here in high school, where your friend Ellen is resource teacher at. Right. And each year I teach geometry, both kind of the regular and honors in the same class. And I teach a calculus class that's like a non-AP course. And just this past year, Indiana got rid of their state test. So it was my job to help start an SAT prep course that prepares students who are maybe not quite in that college ready category to prepare for SAT level math. And then, outside of school, I like a good coffee shop. I got a 5-year-old who's about ready to start kindergarten. So fortunately, she's, doing things out and about during this podcast right now. So that's kind of my introduction.
Thank you, Reuben. Do you mind me asking, are you a neurotypical teacher? Because I know there are neurotypical and neurodiverse teachers.
I teach, one of the things that, I kind of emphasize in my position is that we have to teach all students. Right. And that I have neurotypical students and students that are not neurotypical. I have twice exceptional students as well. And I have to cater. So twice exceptional may be a situation Like, for instance, there may be a student that has like a specific learning disability, but is also high ability as well.
Mm, okay.
And that's actually, I'd say, one of the most exciting students, because often we find that the education student system, doesn't get them.
Hmm.
And they have unique thinking styles. And if you teach them in the right way, I mean, they can really take off and run and surprise you.
Hmm. Yeah, they can. So it sounds like you teach both neurotypical and neurodiverse students. And you said that you help them with math, which is definitely one of the challenges that um, neurodiverse people sometimes have.
Yes, math, I think, requires a lot of executive functioning.
Yeah.
Um, and when I was trained in my master's program, when I was taking the special education methods course, um, there was a statistic that was being spouted out that one of the most common places where there's ADHD diagnoses is
Hmm.
the Algebra 1 course.
Yeah. For myself, when I was in school, I always had a challenge with math. I had to have tutors whenever I did a math course. Um, and in your classes, do you know what specific learning disabilities your students have?
Yes. So on our attendance system, we have apples. And if a student has been designated as having a learning disability, a 504, even being identified as high ability, we
Hmm.
have that information, as well as an overview of your accommodations. And it's required that we read them and understand them and try to implement them in our classroom.
And that's good. I remember when I was emailing you about the interview, it sounded like you create a lot of tutorial videos for your students.
Yes. So right before the pandemic,
Hmm.
um, there was a colleague of mine who also taught geometry that started flipping her classroom,
Mm.
and she started making YouTube videos.
Hmm.
Um, and I had, right before the pandemic, a class that was like probably one of my toughest classes that I had taught in my time at Heron, in that 13 out of the 19 students had an IEP. um,
Mm.
there was a mixture of students that were ADHD hyperactive and ADHD, sort of like the type that kind of just has trouble like focusing, the more passive type.
Hmm.
And those don't mix well, because they kind of like feed off of each other in
Yeah.
a negative way.
Hmm.
So when the pandemic hit, we had to shift to providing instruction online.
Yeah.
And we posted the videos, of the flipped classroom. And what I
Hmm.
noticed is that there were actually several of those students that actually improved in the pandemic.
Mm.
They could have a video where they could start and stop at any time. If you were
Hmm.
writing too fast, that was not a problem.
Hmm.
They could start it and stop it at any time. And I took it a step more, and I started thinking about, what are the students doing who are successful
Hmm.
in learning from the pandemic? And one of the successful things that good math students do is they take notes, and
Right.
they have examples to work off of. And the analogy that I like to use is, it's kind of like, a jazz musician.
Mm.
In jazz, you have to have a melody first before you can improvise.
Hmm.
And in math, regardless of whether you are a super genius or, on the struggle bus with math, you need to have examples to work off of. So I started requiring my students to submit notes.
Mm.
And that was actually part of the independent practice grade during the pandemic. So, I mean, my videos and other colleagues' videos were not perfect. So I frequently, with each semester, made surveys where I asked students to kind of rate the helpfulness of like the online math platform we were using, the quality of the videos, whether they preferred the videos that we produced or the videos that other people produced.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that students preferred when you made the videos yourself, so they could still have your
Mm,
teaching style, and it had to
okay.
be, aligned to the practice that they were doing. So I made it a goal when I taught the summer school class for students that didn't pass geometry to make videos that were 15 minutes or less.
Mm, that's really cool that you did that. Because I know for me, when I had hands-on teaching, whether that was with a video or in person, it was a lot easier for me with my difficult subjects like math and writing. Um, and I can imagine that was really helpful with your students, like you were describing, um, when they can pause and stop at any time, and being able to, it was a good idea to do the survey and have the notes, because then they can be more proactive with their education.
And I saw some really eye-opening statistics with that survey as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I asked periodically the question, did you prefer school before the pandemic, the way it was, like go back entirely to how things were exactly before the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
um, how things were in kind of a completely virtual format or a hybrid of things. And I actually noticed that only about a third wanted to go back to the way things were before the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Um, and 20%, I would say, actually wanted an entirely virtual instruction. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say, there were probably a good 20 to 25% of students that actually saw improvement in their academic performance with a virtual instruction.
Mm.
So I think that really needs to inform our policymakers, because a lot of policymakers think, oh, our kids need to be in school. School was working before the pandemic. No, it wasn't. I mean, the percentage of students, getting below a 15 on the math ACT has gone up from 14% in 2010
Mm-hmm.
to 20% in 2019.
Wow. So describe for me a little bit about how your classroom was before the pandemic, and then how it changed to during and after.
Um, Before the pandemic, my classroom, we had a lot of guided notes. We had whiteboard problems interspersed,
Mm-hmm.
um, and we had skill-based paper assessments. So the
Mm-hmm.
students could, our test questions were aligned to skills, and they got a grade for each skill, so they could kind of track and see what their progress was on each skill in the course. And we use skill-based grading still in our math department, which is really good to, kind of monitor the progress. And we had paper worksheets where IP was just kind of like graded on completion mainly.
Is
Um,
skill-based grading like a letter grade, or is it different?
it eventually translates to a letter grade after,
Mm-hmm.
get all the skills in the grade book. I like to tell students that, if they got like about a 3 out of 4 average on a skill, I mean, three's kind of like, you're mostly mastering the skill. There's some small mistakes in there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did all your work and you got a 3 average, that's about a B- in the class.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard of skill-based. That's why I was asking.
And instead of having like a bad grade on a test, um, you could see, okay, I did good on Pythagorean theorem. Maybe the distance formula was a weaker skill.
Mm-hmm.
And students are allowed to remediate a certain number of skills.
Okay, that makes sense. So they know where they're doing well and where they can do a little bit better.
Yes.
Okay.
So then we shifted to Delta Math, which is an online math platform where you can make custom assignments, and you can even like put in your own YouTube videos as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I made the assignments where I linked my YouTube videos, and the way that I have it set
Excuse me.
is the students have to get a certain number of problems right in each skill. So the kid who gets 2 problems right the first time is going to get the same grade as somebody who got, 5 problems wrong and then 2
Mm,
problems right. And we want our students to be able to, get the practice and repetition they need. So on the easier stuff, they're not going to get as much practice because they don't need as much.
right.
But on the harder stuff, they got to have, more practice on that. So that's something that I've kept in my classroom using Delta Math.
Hmm.
And, occasionally we get some pushback on that. There's students that I got a tough student in my summer school class that said, I want paper worksheets because Delta Math, when I get them wrong, I give up and I get discouraged. Um, when, in paper worksheets, you can kind of get away with,
Hmm.
just writing scribbles and getting the completion points. But in Delta, they have links to their own instructional videos. They have links to my video as well. They can see a worked out example of the problem. And I
Mm.
found that even a lot of like the neurodivergent IEP students actually came up with some really neat independent learning strategies with Delta
Hmm.
Math.
Like what?
So I can think of a senior that I had in my summer geometry class last summer.
Hmm.
She struggled mightily. I mean, she failed geometry multiple times, before the pandemic. And she was a success story. I mean, she got actually not only passed, but got a B. And
Wow.
she had a Google Doc where she would actually take pictures of questions that she got wrong.
Hmm.
And she would keep a notebook of her mistakes. And
Hmm.
eventually she would make less and less mistakes.
That was very creative.
Or I had a student last year who was on the spectrum,
Hmm.
very, below grade level on the NWEA. And, he has like, number sense issues. Like if you gave him a number sense problem, even something like 42 minus 2, I mean, he'd have trouble doing that.
Mm.
But what I noticed is that when he used Delta Math, he had a notebook out and he would try to imitate the steps of the problems.
Oh,
And maybe, he wouldn't be able to do the mental math, but he could start like mimicking the steps.
yeah, that's good because usually I would imagine that the steps would lead to, being able to do the mental math a little bit better.
I mean, he has like some retention and processing speed issues. And,
Hmm.
I did give him the accommodation of letting him use his notes
Hmm.
because he really did need that like graphical, illustration
Right.
in front of him.
Yeah, I usually do too. I couldn't do mental math until I was used to writing it down on paper, and then I could visualize it better in my head. Um, so how is it different now when you teach your students, now that you're, you know, kind of in the end of the pandemic, or it's different?
So I think it really depends on the type of class, I would say.
Hmm.
The average level of independence and dependence in learning in the class. Um, I would actually say Delta Math has blessed me with a lot of data
Mm.
on my students. So I've been able to see how many problems have they attempted,
Hmm.
how long have they spent on a problem, did they get the problem right or wrong, what is their accuracy rate. And I mean, when we look at a test like the NWEA,
Hmm.
which actually assigns a score based off of the task that a student has like a 70% chance of getting correct. So that's like the right cognitive development level. I found that the students who have a program on Delta Math where they're getting 70% of the questions right is about the right level of rigor for that student. So I can use that data to inform me, especially students who are getting less than a coin flip's chance of getting a problem correct. That's a signal for me that they maybe need some more
Hmm.
intensive intervention, and students who were getting maybe above 80% correct, they could use a little challenge. So like if we're doing like a trig unit, for instance, at the click of a button, I can create a custom assignment or an extra credit assignment where I can even access like pre-calculus skills and do next level trigonometry, and they can choose to do that assignment if they finish early. So I think some of these technology programs, we can, rather than having one worksheet, we can assign students problems at their development level and encourage students to practice at their development level.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned a couple times the NWA test. I'm not sure I know what that is for.
So it's our computer adaptive assessment that many schools use at the beginning and the end of the year. And it gives us a good idea about like what math level the student is at.
Okay.
So, and it also predicts performance on like state tests and the SAT and stuff like that too.
Okay, that definitely sounds like that would be helpful for teachers and for the students so they know where they're at. Do you have any, you were talking about this already, but you sounds like you have some students where they were able to excel a lot better with some of the virtual teachings rather than the in-person one.
Yeah. I mean, it's not everybody, I would say, but there are definitely some students that saw, improvement. And I could kind of maybe see why. I did a virtual Algebra 2 class, first session of summer school this year. And when I do a virtual summer class, in that last hour, I have a private conference with each student on Zoom in my breakout room. And I'm able to show them their Delta Math data, tell them why their grade is the way that it is, and what is the quickest way that they can master the skills. So, I mean, I can't like do that as well in a classroom because it's kind of humiliating to talk about somebody's grade in front of other people.
Yeah.
But I mean, like on Zoom, you can do things like you can share your screen and like work out problems and have a teacher one-on-one without having to worry about, what's going on with other students.
Yeah, that makes sense. So would you say during the pandemic it was harder for your neurotypical or neurodivergent students to succeed?
I think it really depended on a lot of different factors. Um, what was their parental support like at home? So I
Yeah.
found, neurodivergents that had strong parent support actually, were more likely, I'd say, to make progress. So I think parental support may have been like a better predictor, I would say, or even like, free and reduced lunch status. I would say some people, certain people on the spectrum, they may not enjoy the technology component as much.
And then how would that compare to your neurotypical students during the pandemic?
I can point to, several neurotypical students, though, that did not make as much progress. I think, a lot of the factors were, did the students have, good quality independent learning behaviors before the pandemic? What was the parental support like at home? And I would actually argue that when I was telling you like about that student that made like that Google Doc, she had a pretty substantial IEP. She was specific learning disability, and she made a lot of progress in a virtual setting. And then there's plenty of neurotypical students like that student that I told you who pushed back on Delta Math and was trying to get out of doing work. He was, more neurotypical. Maybe he had, something, but not like to trigger an IEP.
Yeah.
So I think the neurotypical versus not neurotypical divide, it doesn't tell the whole story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense to me, like you were saying, the factors of their own individual behaviors and their support from the parents. Um, were there, do you think your students that, needed the hands-on support, whether that was virtual or in person, um, were they able to get that during the pandemic, or was that challenging?
I mean, I think it's challenging for any school.
Mm-hmm.
All these Zooms and all that type of stuff. I mean, I think our school, though, we did better than most schools in providing support. We made our students, sign on to Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
We gave them, structured classes. We, went into hybrid. Wednesdays were like student support days in the middle of the pandemic. So they had multiple office hours that they could drop into as well. And
Yeah,
our
Ellen told
resource
me
did a
that.
particularly good job um, of being able to meet with and, establish individual meetings with students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I remember Ellen saying that you had like little mobile buses that could give them Wi-Fi connection during the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I think the resource team is a great resource for us general teachers as well,
Mm-hmm.
especially, I mean, somebody like Ellen, and they're very proactive. And I think they're also very good at our school, and encouraging our students to become advocates for ourselves too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. I hadn't heard of a school doing something like that before. Um, so um, how's your classroom like now with, is it a hybrid of virtual and in person?
So let's see, mainly in person, I would say now, 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
There was a demand for a virtual section, first term of summer school. I just finished teaching, a class that had students from my school and a sister school, a geometry class the past 3 weeks, and that was in person, and then we'll be in person next year.
Mm-hmm. Um, does it feel, I don't know if weird or awkward is the right word, but does it feel weird to be in person more than virtual like you were?
Oh, let's see, it feels more routine now,
Yeah.
but I will talk about like the transition. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of transitioned back to completely in person, um, and more normal school at the beginning of the school year last year.
Okay.
And I bought into Delta Math. I love that platform and I still do. And, having these tech features, and I get to, day one of school and the internet is not working in the school because
Oh.
everybody is trying to use it. So that was day one. So then I had to like make paper alternative copies so everybody could be like on the right foot to be engaged. Uh,
Hmm.
and fortunately, I mean, the internet took actually several months for the internet to get better. So, I had to have plan B, um,
Wow.
for the first 2 months. So it was almost like I had to have plan A and plan B.
Mm-hmm.
And to make things interesting, like on day two, we had a temperature issue in my room where it was like 82 degrees and we had to move classrooms. And I literally had to set up a classroom and have plan A and plan B in a matter of an hour in my prep period.
Wow.
That was, so it's like the master chef of classrooms. Um, And so, I mean, it was almost comical. Um, if I were a first year teacher, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to handle it, but
Mm,
it kind of, made me draw on my repertoire
mhm.
of like the 9 years before that and all the different types of experiences that I had,
Yeah.
be able to get back into the groove.
What would you say you like? What you like the best and least about teaching?
All right. So, what I like about teaching the most, I think there's a lot of room for creativity.
Mhm.
Um, take an abstract math concept, something like proofs.
Mhm.
It's almost an art form, I think, to be able to create a lesson that can try to engage kids, ranging from, kids that could get fives on the AP calculus exam tomorrow, all the way down to a student who can't do like 42 minus 2 in their head.
Right.
And our school, mixes those students together. So we have like blended honors and non-honors. And
Mhm.
I think it's so good, that each of those students can interact with each other.
Mm,
Um, so I think that's something that's really good.
mhm.
Where I think, teaching needs to improve, I would say, obviously, um, teaching compensation.
Hopefully what you can do with these episodes on this podcast, Living with Invisible Learning Challenge, I would like to challenge you to journal about the episodes and just see what you learn from them. Or you can share about the episodes with your friends and family and see what they can learn from them. And as always, I will post the links to the articles that I use in the description of the podcasts. And please let me know if you know somebody who you think would want to be interviewed on this podcast, or if you yourself would want to be interviewed. Please email me. I have my email on my website, and I also have it pretty much pretty accessible on Facebook and Instagram through messaging as well. So you can get in contact with me in those ways.